Okay, so I'll first let Suri say a few word about the side news today we have, and then maybe after a couple of minutes we can begin our lecture.
Yeah. So, as most of you would have heard, Professor Pasi unfortunately passed away last night, and he was a very not only a great mathematician, very good mathematician, but also a friend of many of us. It's sad news. So I thought we could keep a minute of silence if you people don't mind. Okay. So tell me when we can start, Anupam.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining this lecture here. So Professor B. Suri is going to give a couple of lectures today and tomorrow. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, he's going to talk on this topic: combinatorial methods in discrete groups. Suri, over to you.
Okay. So we can hear me clearly, I hope, because I have this new laptop and
Yeah,
things are not
yeah,
moving
it's
easily.
fine.
So I thought in these two talks, I'll just talk about a few sort of combinatorial methods. By combinatorial methods, because we could mean many things like combinatorial topology and so on. I don't mean those kind of method which came up in discrete groups, especially arithmetic groups, but they are purely abstract group theoretic methods. But they come to the fore in the study of arithmetic groups often. So I'll talk about a number of results which have been proved over the years, and hopefully it's a sort of potpourri of many results, many types of things. At least in the first talk, today's talk. Um, so hopefully people can follow up, especially students can follow up any of these um, paths and kind of get into those subjects. So it's going to be a mixture of things, but I'll apologize to people who have heard parts of these lectures. So this is like an exposition. Let me see. Can you see the full screen, or what should I do?
This is also fine if you want to make full screen.
Just start again. So
Either
I
way is
think
fine.
what is happening is, once again, I'll stop presenting and start again.
Okay.
It's not moving for some reason. Um, yeah, now it should be okay. So I just call it combinatorial methods in discrete groups. As you know that one of the basic ideas is to characterize any kind of group, especially the infinite groups, by means of various properties. And if you can characterize them, well and good, or if you can characterize a class of groups by certain properties, and we are going to talk about some properties which are sort of combinatorial in nature, and some of them turn out to be quite deep, and some of them not so much. Let's see. So first thing is, let's start with this basic thing about any abstract finitely generated group. You have then for any n, you have the number of subgroups of given index is finite. So you call that number as a n of g. One studies this a and g. So basic idea is studying this sequence of numbers by its various properties, asymptotic as well as other properties. Can you, for example, characterize g or characterize g among a class of groups, etc. So first thing you notice is that you can assume the group is what is called residually finite, which means there are many subgroups of finite index. Otherwise, it doesn't. Um, it is not useful to study this notion. Groups should have lots of subgroups of finite index. So much so that intersection of all of them is identity. Such a group is called residually finite, as you know. So of course, linear groups are residually finite. It's easy to prove in classical result. So as I said, there are three basic kind of questions which arise. So what kind of growth does this sequence AN have? I mean, given a group, what is its type? And also, finally, given a type of growth, what is the class of groups which is determined by that type of growth? So what I mean by type of growth is something slightly roughly like this. So growth type is a function f of n where an is less than equal to f of fn power a for some power a, and then it's bigger than this another power for infinitely many n. So this we will call as sort of type fn. So you can think of polynomial type, for example. So first thing you notice is that since free groups have very large growth, which is like super exponential type, n power n, and anything is a quotient of a free group, this is the fastest possible growth that we can have for an. So of course, for integers, you have a unique subgroup of any given index. So by the way, Sn sometimes I use, which is the sum of am, m less than or equal to n. So as I said, although this is a kind of slowest growth that you can think of for an infinite group, to show that this is the slowest is very turns out to be not so easy to prove. But we'll recall a proof, sort of steps of the proof. So one of the notions is that a group is said to have polynomial subgroup growth if the number of subgroups of index less than or equal to n grows as a polynomial. It's bounded by a polynomial at least. So here we have this beautiful result. This is almost 30 years old. This is an analog of Gromow's famous theorem on polynomial word length. And interestingly, people who proved this result proved something which is a sort of periodic analog of the Hilbert's fifth problem, which characterizes real Lie groups. Here they characterize periodic Lie groups. I'll mention what the statement they prove and uses soon. So this is the theorem that I talked about, that I mentioned. So this is due to Lubotsky, Mann, and Segal. So all this is what I'm talking right now is part of a textbook. It's called Subgroup Growth. So people can follow it up. So a finitely generated residually finite group has polynomial subgroup growth if and only if it has to be solvable essentially. So solvable means virtually property, some subgroup of finite index has a property. Finite rank simply means all finitely generated subgroups have generated by at the most certain number of elements bounded. So of course such groups are actually linear over Q. So this is from this theorem, for example, we can see that after the polynomial growth is growth of Z is the smallest, slowest type of growth possible for an infinite group. Why? Because it's simply because this theorem says if we don't have polynomial subgroup growth, then it cannot be. It must be solvable if it has polynomial subgroup growth. So you can always find a subgroup of finite index which is mapping onto Z, and so the growth will be at least as big. So once you have polynomial subgroup growth is at least n. So as I said, the way these things go is often when you want to talk about abstract groups, it is useful to give a topology on the group. And one of the things is certain properties which will which don't hold for general abstract groups, hold for residually finite groups, and then you can use topology to study them. For example, the restricted Burnside problem, which is that any finitely generated residually finite group having finite exponent is a finite group. So residual finite, what it means is that there's something called the profinite topology you can give on the group, which means you give a neighborhood of fundamental system of neighborhoods of the identity consisting of all subgroups of finite index. That gives a topology. That's called the profinite topology. And residual finite is this equivalent to this topology being Hausdorff, and you can embed the group inside. It's profinite completion. You can complete the group. And what is the advantage is that, of course, G hat is a profinite group, which means it's a compact group. You can use, for example, a Haar measure and things like that. But also because you can embed G inside G hat, if G is residually finite. There's an inclusion. So G hat is a full profinite completion. I'll come back to a general abstract group, but in between I wanted to mention this. There are also other kinds of completions, so-called pro-P completions, which mean you're looking at a system of neighborhoods of identity which consists precisely of subgroups of P power index for a particular prime P. What you get is what is called pro-P completion. Okay, so for integers you have ZP and so on. So of course, if the group is residually P, which means the intersection of normal subgroups of index of prime power, P power, is identity, which is what I call a residually P, then the group embeds into the pro-P completion. So of course, when you talk about finite generation of a group, in the sense of profinite groups, you're talking about topological finite generation. So there is a finitely many elements. So the subgroup generated by that is dense. And also polynomial subgroup growth and so on, such questions, we're talking about open subgroups. So as I said, the main thing is that for residually finite groups, A and G is A and G hat. So you can as well study the subgroup growth of its profinite completion if it is easier. So sometimes you have to go back and forth. So I just want to outline very quickly a proof of the LMS theorem because some interest is there and it's easy to give an outline. And as I said, this uses a characterization of the Lie groups among the p-adic groups. P-adic. So the finitely generated pro-p group is a p-adic Lie group if and only if it has polynomial subgroup growth in the sense of profinite groups. This is a really beautiful result. And this is what is used. Let's see how the theorem of Lubotsky-Mann-Segal, which I mentioned, which is polynomial subgroup growth groups are virtually solvable. How does it follow? So the basic thing is first you reduce the case of residually p groups, and then once you put your G inside your pro-p completion GP, and since you know that the GP is contained in GL and QP because you have a polynomial subgroup growth, which means it is a p-adic Lie group, so it's linear. And it takes some embedding of QP in C, just some algebraic embedding. So this is G is put inside JL and C, and once it is finitely generated and so on, by standard arguments, you can put it inside GLN of ZS for some finite set of primes. You take integers and invert finitely many primes, that's enough. Okay, so your original group can be put inside JLN Z with certain things, certain primes inverted, that kind of a ring. So the point is that once you put it in this kind of group, to count subgroups of finite index, you can use some kind of arithmetic, meaning various subgroups of finite index which come up from congruence conditions. So things like if you take this JL and ZS and you can map it to JLN of this quotient fields, for example, the map mod P you can look at for every various primes P not in S. Kernels of such things naturally give certain subgroups of finite index which are called congruent subgroups. And then you can intersect with your gamma with that. So point is that if a group is not solvable, it turns out that congruent subgroups themselves grow much faster than polynomial. So let's quickly see, as I said. So suppose it's not solvable, and look at the Zariski closure of this. This will turn out to be a non-solvable group, easy to see. Then here is a deep result one uses, which is
Suri.
Yeah.
This is can you be a little slower because the slides are passing very fast in front of my eyes.
Okay, sorry.
So and you are, I'm not able to see things and
I'm sorry. So shall I go back now? Shall I go back?
Yeah, a little bit slower will be better because I guess.
Okay. Thing is, when I'm giving a proof, I thought the steps I can just show quickly and say a few words. So as I said, what we are proving is this theorem. This theorem. Okay. Once a group has polynomial subgroup growth, we want to say it's essentially solvable. So I said what we are going to use is this kind of characterization of p-adic pro-p groups which are polynomial subgroup growth. Number of open subgroups grows as a polynomial. So this is this theorem says must be a compact p-adic Lie group. So we'll use that, and I'm going to give an outline of the proof. So once you use it, you can put your group inside its pro-p completion, and you see what I have my cursor. Yeah. So I put inside JL and QP, and then you want to think of it in terms of complex numbers. This is not a topological embedding, just an algebraic, just a mapping. So then G inside JL and C, we can easily show, you can put it inside JL and Z 1 by P1, 1 by P2, 1 by PR for some finite set of primes. Once you have that, as I said, you can somehow use this group, JL and ZS, to say that there are at least so many subgroups of finite index, namely the congruent subgroups. Let's see how we use it. So the idea is that if it is not virtually solvable, the subgroups, congruent subgroups themselves are too many, more than polynomial. Is it okay? I can go further. Okay, so let's look at a virtually group which has polynomial subgroup growth but not virtually solvable. The Zariski closure is not solvable, and here is where you use a deeper result of which is known as strong approximation for Zariski dense sets, Zariski dense groups. Essentially, this statement is something like this: that your group gamma, which is sitting inside G of Z, as G being the Zariski closure of gamma, it is mapping on to G of Fp. Okay, this S congruence and all, you can forget. This is, I would say like this in simple terms, strong approximation simply means gamma maps onto GFP for almost all the primes. So this is it's like a Chinese remainder theorem, a strong version of Chinese remainder theorem. That's what strong approximation is. So this property, so from this, you'll say the number of subgroups of index, given index in gamma, grows at least as much as the number of congruent subgroups of this. What is congruent subgroups? I mentioned these are this. Okay, so let me just take this claim first. Number of congruent subgroups of index n grows at least as big as this, n to the log n by log n square. So interesting, this bound naturally comes. We'll see how. So what is the, so as I said, for the proof of this, we'll use some basic number theory, namely the prime number theorem in some easy form. Of course, if you use stronger versions of prime number theorem, you can get stronger results. So let me just see. I wanted to make a comment before coming to this claim. Either the group has polynomial subgroup growth, or the growth is at least as big as this, n to the log n log n. This is Sn gamma, which means summation am m less than or equal to n. Number of subgroups of index at the most n. So as Lubatsky was on to show that the number of congruent subgroups grows like this, n to the log n by log n. So this is an interesting thing, because if a group, if the congruent subgroup property means if we have subgroups of our index in a group like say SL and Z, or I shouldn't say SL and Z, some G of Z, which are not congruent subgroup, then there are many more non-congruent subgroups. That's what this growth will tell you. Growth is much higher order than the congruence growth. So, for example, they raised the question. I don't think it's still known whether growth of this kind, n to the log n by log n, for an abstract group, does it come somehow from as an arithmetic group, arise like an arithmetic group? This will be very interesting if such a characterization can be done just from growth. Okay, right now I'm talking about among arithmetic groups, something has a congruence subgroup property, whatever that means. If we can say something about the growth, but this question is about an abstract group. Just mentioned it as an aside to come back to our proof of this. So let me recall what is a congruent subgroup, of course. So let's look at this ring ZS, and a congruent subgroup is simply a kernel of such a homomorphism. Okay. This is a subgroup. So reduction mod m I'm looking at for a positive integer m. Here inverted S, so this m is co-prime to S.
So G is a group defined over Q, or what? I mean, is an algebraic group defined over Q?
Yeah. So I'm just roughing up a little bit. So you can take the group to be defined over Q. That's why I'm taking GZS. So actually, when you study congruent subgroups, even if you're over number fields, you can take the restriction of scalars and you can go to over Q. So strong approximation simply means this G of ZS maps onto the G of the finite fields, finite ring actually. For example, for almost all primes, this finite ring R by PR, look at the G of R by PR has even order. This is what you are going to use, some interesting little elementary things, which is that it has even order because it has a split torus. So there is some subgroup of order P minus 1 there. The even order is what we are going to use. What we are going to count is some kind of elementary abelian groups, which will give you the count that we want. Because we are going to count number of subgroups of index certain thing in this kernel, right? So we can of course take the exceptional prime wherever it is not onto, and include that in your finite set S. So let's see how prime number theorem comes into the picture. Essentially, prime number theorem will tell you that the number of primes less than or equal to n is like n by log n. I'll call the number as small l. So it's stated in this form, usually analytic form of it. Summation of log p less than or equal to n is asymptotic to capital N. So taking exponentiating, you have this product of p is asymptotic to e to the n. So as I said, gr by gm, of course, is m being the product of distinct primes like this, is product of gr by gp. And as I said, each of them has even order. So look at the number of primes occurring in this product, L of them here. So it contains an elementary abelian group of order 2 power L. So we are not using full strength of things, just some simple things. So this group contains an elementary abelian group of order 2 power L. But you know, the elementary abelian groups of rank L have at least these many subgroups of rank L by 2. Elementary. This is elementary. Okay. So that means your GR has at least 2 to the L square by 4 congruent subgroups containing GM, because you're looking at the quotient, right? We have at least this many. No, but we know that what is the index of this group, we can sort of bound it by some constant, up to constant m power the dimension of the group. So it's some fixed number, fixed m power d. The d is fixed. So that means we have these bounds. Number of congruent subgroups is at least 2 to the L square by 4, which I can rewrite as in this form. Like the log. This is essentially the statement of the main claim that I said. Claim being that number of congruent subgroups goes at least as n to the log n by log n. Congruent subgroup index n will grow at least as n to the log n by log n square. Okay, so I wanted to just give the indication as to how the proof goes. Not really giving the full proof, but not much is involved. So you see already things like prime number theorem, not a big deal, but it's involved. It's useful. I just mentioned in passing because I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but as I said, this subject of subgroup growth is grown like anything, and there is a lot of directions. It is used, people use all kinds of methods like C theory and all prove many things, but I just want to mention what is meant by zeta function of a finitely generated group. This is generated. This is defined in terms of this number of subgroups of index n, a and g. So as you see, if you have a so this is actually introduced for nilpotent groups in the late 80s, and this zeta function seems to have very nice properties. Sort of the very kind of features it has is things like the Dedekind zeta function of number field, because here these groups are product of CELO subgroups. That means you have a Euler product expansion and so on. For example, for the free abelian group itself, zeta function is product of the usual Riemann zeta function at these values. It also has its uses. For example, once you have this, it's easy to deduce many things like what is the number of subgroups of index at the most n in say Z2. It is asymptotic to this. It's easier to deduce from this rather than just doing first principles. I want to mention again one more example, which is this matrix does not come out well. The Heisenberg group 3 cross 3 integer entries ABC. Here the zeta function happens to be this. Actually, it's kind of interesting because this right-hand side looks kind of similar to one of Ramanujan's formulae. I think the formula for summation of the sigma an, sigma bn by n power s, or sigma an is the sum of the nth powers of divisors. There's some similar formula. Okay, so for example, from here you can even deduce things like for a Heisenberg group, here is this Sn. So I want to finish this part saying that finitely generated groups analogy is actually should be seen with the more general Weil zeta function of a algebraic variety rather than Dedekind zeta function. I don't say more about it. For quite some time, it is thought that Dedekind zeta function is the correct analog, but it's really not so. Just finish this part by saying take a profile. Okay, so here I'm taking a either abstract or profinite polynomial subgroup growth. You see, then because of the polynomial growth, you can define this number, right? lim sup of log a n g by log n, which I call the degree, which means smallest c for which this is capital O of n to the c plus epsilon. Smallest c like that. That's a degree. Interesting part is that degree does miss some of the values. For example, it cannot lie in intervals like this 0, 1, 1, 3 by 2, 3 by 2, 5 by 3, etc. And degree of a subgroup of finite index, you see, is between degree of, it's degree of G is between degree H and degree H plus 1. So it's sort of different from, I mentioned that it's the polynomial subgroup growth theorem is somewhat like Gromov's theorem, but there are also departures from that. So unlike Gromov's word growth, commensurable groups there have the same degree of word, but here commensurable groups don't have same degree. Also, degree need not be an integer. We already saw that Heisenberg group. We didn't see it, but from the zeta function, you can see that the degree is actually 3 by 2. So I think I'm not sure whether anything about this is known by now, but some years back nothing was known. The degree could be irrational, and whether the set of degrees forms a countable set. These are all interesting things in subgroup growth. Also, of course, for nilpotent groups, Bass had given a formula for the degree of nilpotent groups in the sense of Gromov word growth, but there is no such formula known for this subgroup growth, the ANG that we are talking. Okay. So as I said, we're going to talk to some other notions which are turned out to be deeper connections with arithmetic groups, that is. But before that, I just want to mention in passing again some other properties of A and G. For example, you might look at something like what are the arithmetic properties of A and G. I don't think it has any deep kind of implications, but you can, just for its own interest, you can study. For example, one can show that the number of subgroups of index n is odd for the modular group, if and only if n is of this form. Similar results can be proved for many other groups, okay, which are of arithmetic type. Sort of arithmetic interest. As far as I know, they don't have any implications, any deeper implications on the structure of the group. Okay, so I start with this notion which has been really kind of come to the fore in the 80s, but it's come to stay in some sense because many aspects have been revealed. This is called bounded generation. So, or bounded generation by cyclic groups.
So
what is
Suri, I have a basic question.
Yeah.
So you said this on the structure of the groups, A and G doesn't seem to play a role, right?
Sorry?
You said on the structure of the groups, the numbers A and G doesn't seem to play any, they do not seem to play any role, right?
Of course, it plays a role. No? For polynomial solvable groups have polynomial subgroup growth. And what we are saying is the whole idea was to characterize a class of groups by means of its growth. If A and G grows, it doesn't have exactly, as I said, it may not characterize the group itself, but among a class of groups. So this theorem was just about the polynomial growth implies group is of solvable type. Okay.
I see.
Now, more things are known. You are right that, sometimes you'll be able to say the group, if the growth is like this, group must be this, but there are very few such results.
But what does zeta function say about the group, structure of the group?
Yeah, so the analytic properties of zeta function does give some ideas about the groups. I have not mentioned it here at all. Okay, this is a whole book of Bass and Segal and so on. Okay, not Bass, Lubotsky and Segal, subgroup growth. But it's very difficult to say just that this group is determined by this zeta function. No such result is known. I don't know. I went out to this. Now I hope I can come back to this. What is happening? Can you see now?
Yes, we can see now.
It's gone into smaller size now. I hope you can see it full screen.
Yeah, it's fine for
us. Fine. Sorry. So an abstract group is said to be boundedly generated of degree some less than equal to n if simply this right hand side is a product of cyclic groups as a set. This cyclic group times this cyclic group. And so any element is of form G1 to the A1, G2 to the A2, Gn to the An, where AIs are integers. Okay, of course, GIs may not be distinct. So this is called bounded generation. Of course, the finitely generated, boundedly generated group is finitely generated in particular, but it's much stronger. I'm not able to move this. I think I'll have to go out and come back. Sorry. This is a problem about having a new laptop and I'm not able to manage. I hope now I can move it. Okay, so first a simple observation, which is that we would like to know, just like finite generation, if I have subgroup of finite index, then is it also boundedly generated if the group is boundedly generated? Yes, it is true. Homomorphic images are also boundedly generated. And from the normal subgroup and quotient, you can deduce bounded generation. Okay. Incidentally, this kind of property is true for finitely presented groups also, but the boundedly generated groups may not be finitely presented. Examples are there. So here, only non-trivial part here would be, if a group is boundedly generated, a subgroup of finite index is also boundedly generated. If I say non-trivial, it is not difficult. It is just so it requires some proof. Let's just quickly see the proof of that. Suppose G is a boundedly generated group. Write it as product of cyclic groups. Since of course you can assume the H, which is a finite index, you can assume it is normal of finite index. Then any arbitrary element can be written in the form given to the R1, of course. Any element of G itself can be written like this. If the index of H is M, then you divide out all the Ri's by M and look at the remainders, EI's. A simple observation will tell you that elements of H can be written like these remainders are there, no? E1, E2, EM, En, and then this conjugates like this. That means a set of this kind. Take this finite set now. EI is varying between 0 and M minus 1, and look at this conjugates. So this group is generated by these many cyclic groups. So you can even have a bound on the degree of bounded generation. This is just to mention, it's very easy. Why not mention the proof? Okay, so first thing is free groups, of course, don't have bounded generation because you can have words of any length like that, XY, XY, etc. So they don't have bounded generation. That means SL2Z also is not boundedly generated, being since it has a free subgroup of finite index. Okay. So as I said, this sort of rather innocent looking property has a lot of ramifications, which will come up. We'll mention that. So sometimes when you mention one notion, there are other related notions which also is useful to compare. Briefly, just say that there is a notion of finite width. If you have group and you have subset E, so of course the subset E itself could be infinite. Okay, so you want to have finite width with respect to the subset E. If every element can be written as product of this n many elements. Okay. So for example, if you have a ring, like a ring of integers of a number field and so on, which are finitely generated, so then saying that it is a bounded generation is same thing as it is finite width with respect to the set of all elementary matrices. Okay. Goes with a one entry, one non-diagonal entry to be something, and one to the diagonal. So the real interest started in bounded generation when Riemann hypothesis was invoked actually, I should say, to prove that the groups SL and O for the ring of integers of number fields, when n is at least 3, have bounded generation.
Sorry, so the SLNR is bounded generated when the ring R is finally generated?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So not any ring, that's what, for commutative rings. So it has to be of arithmetic type. So that's what I'm saying. It is not, I will come to that. In fact, for general commutative rings, which have some, okay, so I mentioned about arithmetic types only. They are boundedly generated for n bigger than or equal to 3. True. Okay. Yeah. So let's look at, so as I said, SL and O for the ring of integers for at least n is at least 3 is boundedly generated. Of course, we already mentioned that SL2Z is not. I just want to mention for the SL and Z case, bonded generation can be proved using Dirichlet's theorem. That's a nice proof. In fact, the proof of Carter and Keller was crystallized into a sort of nice, simple proof by Adian and Menneke in using this Dirichlet's theorem. I could have included it here, but I can tell you where I can send it to you. So anyway, what I'm saying is some elementary number theory is involved in this. These are all bonded generation seems to be using some not so elementary number theory. So I just want to mention one of the things we did a few years back now is that whenever you have a ring of S integers in number field, SL2 of ring of S integers has bonded generation as soon as the ring has infinitely many units. I'll just mention a little bit about that later. This was of interest because almost for 50 years people had been doing this. Okay, so now I just want to mention for a general commutative ring, instead of SLN, because we don't know that SLN, so we can look for SENR, which may be a proper subgroup in general. So I want to mention that the question of generation, bonded generation for ENR is a question of K theory. So, for example, this is what I want to say. This naturally leads to questions on K theory. And that's because we are looking at elementary matrices. And also noting that when n is at least 3, any elementary matrix like this is a commutator. So, see, bounded finite width with respect to elementary matrices also implies finite width with respect to commutators, because that it can be posed in a general. Does group have finite width with respect to commutators? So I mentioned earlier that finitely generate matrix. So let me define now what is meant by bounded generation for a pro-finite group. So as I said, this appears like a big bar. Actually, this bar is coming bar actually. Okay, so G1 bar, G2 bar, Gn bar. So a profinite group has bounded generation if this property holds. Take cyclic groups and their closures and so. And the fact that before reading about Lazard's work, I want to say a group has bounded generation, abstract group which is finitely generated. If it has bounded generation, then its profinite completion also has bounded generation as a profinite group. And that is not difficult to show. It's basically arguments like Baire category theorem is what you use. And not only the pro-P completions also have bounded generation. So I mentioned that Lazard's work on periodic Lie groups tells you that pro-P groups which have bounded generation are precisely the groups which are periodic Lie groups. So this is really the connection. I mentioned here, if a group has bounded generation, so do its pro-P completions. So since pro-P groups which have bounded generation are Lie groups, that means they have linear representations. That means we have some kind of a sufficient condition for linearity. If you have a finitely generated abstract group, if it has bounded generation, and for some prime P, it has residually P, it has many subgroups of P power index, then it is linear, because you can put it inside the pro-P completion, which is linear, faithful representation. We can use this to show certain groups are not linear. Certain groups don't have bounded generation if you know already they don't have faithful representations. For instance, automorphism group of a free group can show does not have bounded generation because it does not have any faithful linear representation. Okay. So in the context of arithmetic groups, I just mentioned that like bounded generation, two other properties arise.
So, Suri, I have a question about this Lazard's theorem. So, this is about periodic Lie group, right? It's a condition for periodic Lie group.
So, for a pro-P group to be a periodic Lie group, it is a abstract pro-P group and compact analytic periodic group.
So, you are saying these groups are going to be linear also, right?
Yes. They are going
sometimes you are saying periodic Lie groups, sometimes you are saying periodic linear Lie groups. Are they?
Yeah, so compact periodic Lie group means a compact subgroup of GL and QP. They're all going to be compact subgroup of GL and QP for some n. You can even take QP. You don't have to take other fields also. This is from famous. This is a very what do you call seminal work of Lazard in IHS, which everybody quotes all the time. 1965 or something, 68 or something.
So this linearity is already inbuilt there, or it is a?
That's right. They have to show it's a linear Lie group, compact linear Lie group, compact subgroup of GL.
Okay, that's what you mean by p-adic Lie group, right?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, this is like Hilbert's problem. You have to give a structure, manifold structure, and do it.
Okay. All right.
It's all inbuilt in it. That's
okay.
It's a big, even though if you read the paper, a lot of things are there.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm just using it like a black box right now. Okay, let me go further. So I mentioned 642. Okay. So I said like bounded generation, there is also this property called polynomial index growth. Remember, I talked about polynomial subgroup growth, no polynomial index growth. That means if we take nth powers, does the index grow like a polynomial? It's called polynomial index growth. It looks like, okay, some property, what is the use? Okay, fine, let me see. So then there is also a special case of that Pig dash, which means you fix a prime P, and for any fixed n and prime P, the index of gamma power n p power r grows like this. Why I mentioned this is it will turn out that you can easily show that bounded generation implies Pig, which implies Pig dash. And often you can check Pig dash easily, comparatively easily. For example, as I said, even for SL and Z n bigger than or equal to 3, bounded generation is not so easy to check. Okay. Now, as I said, Dirichlet's theorem can be used to check that, but Pig dash is much easier to check. And what is the purpose of introducing this again? Because for a profinite group, again this bounded generation implies Pig implies Pig dash. But what's more, if you take the group to be a pro-P group, then all these conditions are actually equivalent. It's not just implication; they are all equivalent to the group being p-adic group, Lie group, linear Lie group, as Pralay was mentioned. And what is more, for arithmetic groups, so suppose take a group like SL and Z, you take its profinite completion, then all these properties are equivalent. I just want to mention that this is for a pro-P group, right? Condition. They are all equivalent, but such a thing does not hold for general profinite groups. Only for pro-P groups. In fact, for even something like the profinite completion of SL and Z, even the Sylow P group subgroups are not finitely generated. Forget about it. Okay, so what I want to say is Lazard's criterion is very special for pro-P groups. Profinite groups, you have no such criterion. So coming back to this arithmetic groups, things like SL and Z or SL and other group, G of Z, G of ring of integers of a number field, or invert finitely many primes and call it S arithmetic group. So if you have gamma as an S arithmetic group and a semi-simple algebraic group, then Platonov and Rapinchuk, and of course the same time really, Lubotsky proved that congruent subgroup property actually is equivalent to this abstract looking property. When I say abstract, I mean here for the profinite completion of gamma as bounded generation. If you like, abstract profinite group theoretic property. So, of course, first you can notice that congruent subgroup property implies that this property holds, bounded generation for the profinite completion holds, but the fact that it characterizes the congruent subgroup property was the difficult part. So, for quite a long time. So I mentioned that bounded generation for an abstract group implies bounded generation for its profinite completion. And here above you see something like profinite completion of an arithmetic group has bounded generation if and only if the arithmetic group has a congruent subgroup property. Now we can wonder whether, so only one way of proving congruent subgroup property would be to prove bounded generation for the arithmetic group. Now we can also wonder, does the bounded generation for the profinite completion imply the bounded generation for the original group? For a long time, it was thought that it may be equivalent, or one doesn't know. Very, very recently, it has been shown that it is far from true. So there are many arithmetic groups. I have put inventions up here. It has appeared already. No. Many groups are there whose many arithmetic groups are there whose profinite completions have bounded generation, but the groups fail to have bounded generation. I'll come to that at the end of today's. As I mentioned here, in view of the equivalence of bounded generation for profinite completion of an arithmetic group with a congruence to group property, the last work shows the amazing fact there are many such arithmetic groups. In fact, what I would say is that there are groups which have rank 0 over the group. That means the lattices. So that means they are groups in anisotropic. They are anisotropic groups. In that group, you won't have generation by bounded generation. If at all you have, it has to be by semi-simple elements. Okay, so there are no unipotent elements. I'll come to that at the end again. So this is 90s. Tarskian first proved. So as I said, SL and Z it was proved earlier, and then Tarskian proved bounded generation for arithmetic groups in quasi-split groups of higher rank. Other than that, in non-quasi-split, only for a few handful of orthogonal groups it has been proved, because isotropic groups. Because I mentioned for anisotropic groups, it won't be true. So I mentioned another property which comes from bounded generation. So take an abstract group. Understand what is bounded generation, product of cyclic groups. And suppose it has a so-called fabulous property, as this is coined by Hyman Bass. Fab property is finite abelianization. So any subgroup of finite index H has the property that H mod HH is finite. So it's called a fabulous property. So Rapinchuk proved that if bounded generation and fab hold, then the group is semi-simply rigid. What is called number of completely reducible representations is finite in any given dimension. And surprisingly, it was proved in characteristic positive also. This result, last result, is proved by. I'll mention how Rapinchuk's proof goes to give you an idea how the condition comes, how bounded generation plays a role in representations. So let's see it for SL and Z n bigger than or equal to 3. Take a representation and consider the restriction to the upper triangular unipotent group U. Now we know that since it is U is solvable, we have a normal subgroup of finite index of certain index D, say, so that it goes into upper triangular matrices, right? And of course, that means commutator is going to be unipotent. That means now what? Look at the elementary matrix Xij. I should write here Xij of 1, which means 1 at the ijth entry. Xij of 1 power d square is a commutator here. So row of that will be unipotent. But you see all these Xij of 1 for different ij, they're all conjugate. That means when you look at the Zariski closure of this groups, this group generated by them, this is a dimension at the most 1. So the whole idea is that this Zariski closure has dimension 1. That means since the group has bounded generation by elementary matrices, okay, each Gi is like an Xij of 1 for some ij. Because of that, there is a fixed number. This number k is there, right? Bounded generation of degree k. That means Zariski closures are the most dimension k, from which you can kind of, by some standard arguments, show that there are only finitely many representations of completely reducible representations of a given dimension. Just to give an idea of how such an abstract property plays a role in this. Okay. So as I said, even in characteristic P, even though characteristic P is very different, characteristic 0 in terms of things like bounded generation. For example, a group G, a subgroup G of JLNF for a field of characteristic P positive is boundedly generated. It can happen only if it is, abelian, essentially. It is virtually abelian. It's far from true for. So you see, characteristic P, there are very few boundedly generated groups, linear groups. But nevertheless, they could prove the analog or Rapinchuk's result about semi-simple rigidity. They did prove that. I'm not going to that. Just want to mention that certain properties of characteristic 0 do carry over to characteristic P. So one more related thing is the so-called Kazan's property T. since I have 1.5 hours, I think I can mention these things. This is of interest again. So trivial representation is isolated in the space of all unitary representations. This is a kind of definition one gives. But group theoretically, one would think of consequence of property T, which is that any group with property T is finitely generated and has finite abelianization. H1 is finite. So 1999, so very beautiful paper of Shalom in IHS, he noticed this connection between property T and bounded generation. See, in property T, there is a trivial representation being isolated. We can even say numerically kind of how much isolated it is. So there are these constants. For the groups SL and Z with n bigger than or equal to 3, use explicit bounded generation. He obtained explicit Kazan constants. Okay, this is again very interesting in different direction. Also, in that same paper, he showed that this kind of group, SLN or polynomial ring over Z, he showed that it will have property T provided it has bounded generation. Bounded generation with respect to elementary matrices, by the way. So you see, you may be able to prove a group has bounded generation, but sometimes you'll have to prove it has bounded generation by elementary matrices if you want to deduce something like property T. I must mention that SL and Z, x1, x2, xn, this group, whether bounded generation holds is still unknown. Okay. On the other hand, see, Shalom has said bounded generation would imply property T, but property T has been proved now with circumventing the bounded generation. Okay, so let's see. I mentioned that this is an open question whether these groups have bounded generation or even over Q. Forget about Z, even over Q. Van der Kallen had long back shown this is a K-theoretic question, which is that SLN of Fx does not have bounded generation by elementaries if F is a huge field. It has infinite transcendence degree over Q. For example, SLN Cx doesn't have bounded generation. In fact, the property that he uses to prove this is that, yeah, okay, anyway, he uses K-theory. So, why is this group of interest? I mentioned this group, it's also of interest because many groups which are arithmetic groups are groups like lattices inside SLD of some number field are quotients of this. So if you prove some property, so these are sometimes called universal lattices. So of interest to look at whether bounded generation holds for this. If you know, then of course you could have proved bounded generation in a jiffy for all of them. But still this is not known. So I mentioned one related thing like property T, there is so-called property tau. So universal lattices, these ones, have a weaker property called property tau. Property tau is the trivial representation is isolated, but in the space of unitary representation with finite images. So this is sort of weaker property. So this does not still prove property T. However, 2006 is when Kasapov and Nikolov had proved that, but soon after that, Shalom himself proved that these have property T when n is big enough compared to m. Okay, and he somehow circumvented bounded generation. Earlier I had said bounded generation implies this, but without somehow cleverly.
So Suri, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what did Tavgen prove that SLN R, you said something like R is a ring?
So if you take an arithmetic group and then quasi-split group of higher rank,
and what is
yeah.
And R is a commutative ring? Is some conditions
No.
there?
Is the ring of integers, a ring of integers in a number field. So G of O has bounded generation provided G is a quasi-split group over Q of rank bigger than or equal to 2.
So okay, so R is a very special type of ring.
Yeah, very special type of ring. That's why I'm saying somehow even though bounded generation is a very abstract group theoretic property, you are able to sometimes prove it for number of rings using number theory. And not only that, you are able to conclude that that arithmetic group might have properties like congruence to group property and so on. Yeah, so still there are other questions which are on other rings, whether bounded generation holds, what does it imply? So I mentioned a few of them. So let me just go further. I think so I'll just skip these things, how Shalom proved this. There are many interesting connections for a general thing. Okay. Once again, yeah. So this part I'll just mention that if we have an arithmetic group and a simple algebraic group, which has bounded, the arithmetic group has bounded generation by unipotent elements. Suppose we assume that, then for any action of G, every orbit of unipotent subgroup is a bounded set. Suppose that. Then you show that orientation preserving. So in other words, different types of properties also follow from bounded generation. This is just an aside. I don't know the proof of this actually. I don't remember seen it earlier, but so I briefly mentioned here. You know that normal subgroups of finite index and higher rank lattices and Lie groups. This is so-called Margulis normal subgroup theorem, and this gives rise to something called commensurator subgroup problem, because there are people who work on commensurators. They have very interesting results. So this study by Shalom and Willis use bounded generation. So for example, you look at a group like SL2Z, it is commensurated by a larger subgroup. Commensurator means the intersection is a finite index. So this commensurator subgroup problem is a question whether any arithmetic subgroup, which is the only infinite groups which are commensurates, are again S arithmetic group for a very invert smaller number of, how do I say it, S1 arithmetic subgroup for a subset S1 of S. Of course, this commensurates this. So we are saying this is the typical, this is the only way or not. In S arithmetic group, which is commensurated in a group, then that's also S arithmetic for a different S, which is bigger than your S. This is a question they asked. And before they asked the question, Venkatramana had proved that this is true for split groups, isotropic groups of rank at least 2 in the G of Z. And he use the congruence subgroup property further. He had independently proved this. This is his first paper, I think, Journal of Algebra. But it can be interpreted as answering this question for a group of rank at least 2. But you see, this doesn't address things like anisotropic groups and so on, smaller rank groups. So let me see, now it is almost 7. So perhaps I'll just skip this. So they have, in fact, formulated a question which is a generalization of congruence property and commensurator property. Which is that whether an S arithmetic group is commensurated only by an S dash arithmetic group. Essentially like that. It's some kind of rigidity. Simultaneously generalized. So forget this part. So I'm just going very quickly. So I want to mention one elementary looking question. Such questions are also open. So can you find constants, positive constant A and B, so that every matrix in SL2Z is product of at the most this bounded number of elementary matrices here in SL2Q, and where the denominators of these matrices are all bounded by some B. So this is sort of related to these questions. Okay. Now, one more kind of property I come to. I kept mentioning about congruence subgroup property, whether every subgroup of an index contains a congruent subgroup in something like SL and Z, G of Z. So this property can be also thought of as whether the group can be embedded as a closed subgroup of so-called adelic group. Adelic group simply means you take product of all the local groups. Product of SL and KV, QP, let's say. And in fact, this has been proved also. And in fact, what turns out is that while proving this, we had also conjectured that any closed subgroup of an adelic group, that is any closed subgroup of product of SL and QP, which is finitely generated as a profinite group, is boundedly generated as a profinite group. This has been proved also. So some more question comes from arithmetic groups, but it applies to general groups. So there are abstract groups like this. You take product of PSL and F2 power R, which is, you can show is boundedly generated as a profinite group. This infinite product is there. But it does not have, its discrete subgroups are not boundedly generated. Okay, I had already mentioned Pavlian's bounded generation. Forget it. I mentioned one more elementary example in groups which are finitely generated but not boundedly generated. These are these kind of Greek product groups. You take this group of 2 by 2 matrices, okay, where you can take f to be any polynomial with integer coefficients, and m and n can be any integers, positive and negative. This can be identified. This is a kind of form of Z Greek product with Z. So you can see that this group is finitely generated, just generated by 2 matrices. These 2 matrices. It is not boundedly generated, one can prove. I have not given the proof here, but it's a nice little exercise to prove it. And it's kind of a elementary exercise. It's nice. But most generally so this group does not have bounded generation. More generally, you can show that which groups which are Greek products are bounded generation, one can show. But this is an abstract question, nothing to do with arithmetic groups. See, that's why I said we are talking about combinatorial properties of groups which are sort of discrete groups. Most of the time we are dealing with kind of discrete groups coming from Lie groups, arithmetic groups, and so on. But sometimes, as an aside, some results drop out for general groups also. So I mentioned this SL2OS, more recent work. So what we show is that if the group of units is infinite, then every matrix is a product of at most 9 elementary matrices. As a consequence, we can show this as bounded generation. So if your number field is K and SL2 of the ring of integers is a product of these many cyclic subgroups. One can also deduce that for SLN from SL2 is the most difficult case. Something which is true for SL2, then it is most difficult to prove. Of course, if it is not true, then it's a separate thing. Then we can easily deduce for SLN n bigger than or equal to 3. I should mention that if S is a set of all infinite places, there is no finite place here, then this factorization of SL2 as a finite product of cyclic groups, all of them are unipotent. On the other hand, if S is not this, then we show that it must include some semi-simple matrices. There cannot exist any factorization with all gamma unipotent. Okay, so for example, now what is the most natural thing ring we can think of? You take SL2Z 1 over P. So take P to be large enough prime, at least 11. Then you show that 5 cyclic subgroups will suffice. And you can show that 4 do not suffice. You can give examples. So this kind of result, what should I say? It's number theoretic, in some sense classical number theoretic, and use classical number theory. Yeah, as I mentioned, not everything is a product of 4 elementary matrices. So what we have done is, I mentioned this because some very nice and simple ideas basically used, and of course you have to do the work to make it work. But the key notion is what we call the Q split prime. So in a number field, a prime P is called a Q split. Okay, if it is local degree over the corresponding prime, the degree F for a prime, you have this F and G, right? F is 1. So main point is that Q split primes have very nice properties. Namely, if you have a Q split prime in a number field, a ring of integer number field, then the map from O to O mod P power n, group of invertible matrices is the units is a cyclic group. Moreover, see, this is again B is interesting. If you have C knows as that O mod P square star, the units is generated by C, then C also generates O mod P power n star. So this is nothing but saying that something is a primitive root mod P square is also primitive root mod P power n for odd prime P. Number which is primitive root mod P square is also primitive root mod P power n for higher n. So this kind of simple looking property generalize and show the existence of such Q split primes and use them. So we use some basic things like Chapathy density and generalizing Dirichlet's theorem. For example, this kind of result one can prove. Take the ring of S integers, and if you have relatively prime elements here, AB, then there exist infinitely many principal Q split primes. Okay, this is the sort of refinement of Dirichlet's theorem, having this property of pi congruent to A mod B. So this kind of thing is, I don't go much into this proof of this because it's somewhat long. Here I mentioned why factorization must involve some semi-simple matrices once the set S which you have inverted, set of primes S you have inverted, something which is a finite prime, then it must involve semi-simple matrices for some simple reasoning. Yeah, I can say that here. So let's take an element, take a matrix which is unipotent. What happens to that? That means when you look at anything in the group, cyclic group generated by gamma, all the valuations of Aij, this valuation V in S, are bounded by a certain number just depending on gamma. So that tells you that if suppose you have a, that means if you have this bounded generation here, then all the valuations are bounded for any matrix in SL2, which is of course not true. So that means you should have some non-unipotent elements. This I want to kind of mention here. I said SL and ZX, does it have bounded generation? One does not know. Even, by the way, even for SL and QPX, one doesn't know. Sorry, not QPX, ZPX, one doesn't know. ZPX is easier than ZX, periodic integer ZP. As I said, Van der Kallen proved that SL and FX does not have bounded generation if F is a field of infinite transcendence degree over Q, but it works only for fields. Even for big rings like ZP does not work. But so this person, Bogdan Niga, proved for a finite field. So surprisingly, nobody had noticed it. So he asked me, I said, I don't think it is known, and he proved it. And of course, you can imagine what he would have used. I said for SL and Z, the elementary proof uses Dirichlet's theorem on primes in progressions, arithmetic progressions. He used a similar thing. So he proved this boundedly generated by this many elementary matrices. The number is same almost, you see. And yeah, as I said, compare it with the result of Van der Kallen, which says SL and CX is not boundedly generated by elementary matrices. So what does he use? He uses the analog of Dirichlet's theorem, which is the following theorem. F is a finite field here. So you know that Fx is a global field, the ring of integers of a global field. So Fg are co-prime, then there are infinite many primes in this, which are congruent to G mod M. And here you can choose the prime to be any degree, the polynomial to have any degree, any large enough degree. So this is the version he uses and sort of imitates Adian-Menikes proof. This. I end by saying something like this. Recently, Korvaya, Rapinchuk, and Ren and Zanier used. So this is something like using very different type of methods. Laurent's theorem from Diophantine geometry to prove the following thing. If a group is boundedly generated by semi-simple elements, then it must be virtually solvable. Such a strong result. So if you use only semi-simple matrices, only way you can do it is the group has to be solvable. Very strong result. So as a consequence, as I mentioned, if you take an anisotropic algebraic group over a number field, where many things are open, even congruence of group property is open for such lattices which are arithmetic groups. In such groups, infinite arithmetic groups of such things are never boundedly generated. So it's somewhat a very strong result. It's not just there can exist. All the examples are examples. All the arithmetic groups are examples. In anisotropic groups, they are never boundedly generated. On the other hand, suppose we manage to prove that the group has the congruence of group property. If you are able to prove that, that would mean the profinite completion has the congruence of group property. So there are few cases when congruence of group property has been proved. So for them, it means the profinite completion has bounded generation, whereas the group itself does not have. Okay, so I think I didn't want to mention this commensurator and so on. Otherwise, thank you. I'll just stop here, even though much ahead of time.
Thank you, Suri. Anyone has any question? We can discuss some questions.
What I'll do is I'll send notes. Tomorrow, after tomorrow's lecture, because in the same
Sure.
file
Yeah,
I have this.
absolutely.
I'm going to add, I think, Adian Manik's proof also, so somebody can see that.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really a khichdi of various things. I hope something I conveyed here.
Yeah, it's interesting to know lots of videos.
So Suri, I have a question.
Tell me. Ask me.
So this result of the last result that you said, that G is a subgroup of GLN K, where K is characteristic zero field, and then it is boundedly generated by semisimple element, means G is solvable, right? Virtually solvable.
Yes.
So that says that I mean SL and Z is also not generated by semisimple elements, right?
Yeah, exactly.
My question is the following. So does this fact that SL and Z, it doesn't have bounded generation by semisimple element, does it follow more elementarily, or?
It's a very good question, because it's a natural question. People have been trying for many years. Okay. In fact, Rapinchuk told me that every time you talk, he would say something like, "You can try to see if there are semi-simple elements. It's not known how to do it." So for a long time, people don't. Of course, bounded generation elementaries. Can you avoid elementaries and do it? They did computer experiments and thought that they could, do it. But in fact, even for a division algebra, quaternion division algebra, where of course your group is anisotropic, and this result will tell you that it doesn't have, so that has semi-simple elements only. So they tried for semi-simple elements. For that, it seemed to be true, but nothing is proved as yet, even for division algebra. And for SL and Z, classical groups like that, until now, nothing was known how to, can we prove by semi-simple elements, because now this tells you that it's not possible. It's a good question, because it's a natural thing, obviously. When you know a group very well, can you generate it by other kinds of elements? That's why the SL2OS was interesting, because not only because for 40, 50 years people have been trying this, but also because some unipotents are used, some semi-simple has to be used. So Anupam, I'm sorry that if I finished much earlier. I thought I'll do some other thing, then it
this
looked
is
like
fine.
it was too far afield.
Yeah, that's fine. Just few minutes for some questions.
I have another question. So about your first thing, that Lyubodsky, Mann, Segal, that you have characterized the periodic Lie groups in terms of certain properties, right?
Yes.
So my question is, so one knows that if something holds, then something is a Lie group. So is it possible to read the dimension from those properties of the Lie group or other properties?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, Lazard's work will tell you what the dimension is. This. It's approximately like this. I mentioned that you take your propy group gamma, look at gamma power, subgroup generated by gamma n p power r or something. Then you look at the index of that. It will grow as sort of d power of something n p power r. So that d is a dimension. So Lazard's work tells you. In fact, they use Lazard's work mainly to show this characterization. So in some sense, you can say the characterization is due to Lazard only, and they apply it in this situation. They sort of adapt it, and it can give the dimension. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so tomorrow